that cute little bald-faced calf on the far right, his name was Henry, and he was an orphan that I actually got as a birthday present a few years back. So near and dear to my heart, little Henry calf. And livestock are just something that really lights my fire and I get really excited about. So I'm excited to share some of the pros and cons with you today of several different livestock species. This is an overview slide of the species we'll cover today. I'm going to start kind of smallest and end up largest. So we'll jump right into rabbits as an enterprise. So if you're thinking about rabbits, some of the things you might consider is that you can raise rabbits for meat, fiber, breeding stock, and even as pets. And we ended up with one that somebody dropped off at the fairgrounds the other day. Apparently they didn't think they needed him anymore. And he ended up in a really nice 4-H family home as a pet. But thinking through the pros, they're really pretty easy and inexpensive to get into because their housing and land needs are minimal. So if you have a super small acreage, and this might be a good fit for you. They're very highly reproductive. So you could have 50 to 75 bunnies in a year, and thinking about the reason that is they breed semi-on demand. When you put the male and the female together, that's when she decides to ovulate, and then they have babies. So meat rabbits would be a fast turnaround time, 1 month gestation, and then you'd have that finished meat product in 10 to 12 weeks, which is really quick. And if you were looking to have that as an enterprise, if you had a demand for that meat product, you could be producing that meat product pretty readily and pretty often. And there is a demand for breeding and pet rabbits, like I mentioned, 4-H projects out there and around, and people who are looking for breeding stock if they're also raising meat rabbits or pet rabbits or fiber rabbits, any of the above. Some of the cons to raising rabbits as an enterprise. Depending on where you live, you might find that steady market for rabbit meat to be a little challenging. It's not something that is just, I'm not sure that I've ever seen rabbit in a grocery store, so you might have to be creative in your marketing. And if you're selling the meat, you need to most likely do your own processing, which isn't difficult, but it is something that you need to consider. And Colette and Ariel are going to talk a little later about laws and regulations, so things to really consider as you start to develop this type of enterprise. And if you're raising rabbits for fiber sales, it's really important to really educate yourself on the fiber, and that's going to be applicable across any of the species that we talk about today that have a fiber component. And of course, they are vulnerable to predators and weather, so they need some protection in their housing situation. Next up the chain, a little bit larger animal, poultry. So you can raise chickens, ducks, geese, turkeys, and meat and eggs are of course an option. And the thing about chickens is they're super easy to get into. If we had a little bit more time, and I might have this link set out, there's a really funny video about chickens being a gateway livestock. You have chickens, then you think you need a steer eventually because you're going to live off the land, and it's this great big dream of caretaking, and it's easy to get into and easy to get really excited about. So chickens don't need a lot of land, and their housing can be minimal. Providing a place for them to roost at night and get out of the weather is important. They can also help you improve your soils, and they're walking composters and walking fertilizers, and depending on if you want them to be that way for you. And if they are out, like I like this picture on the right there, showing the chickens out in the grass, pasture can actually be up to 30% of the poultry diet. So they still need grit and they still need some other things, but if you have the ability to raise birds on pasture, which I think we'll get to talk about more today, it's an opportunity in that way for those birds to gain part of their diet just from what's naturally growing out in the pastures. They're also a fast turnaround for a meat product, 8 to 24 weeks, and nearly everyone eats eggs or poultry, so finding that customer base can be relatively easy. And the cons of raising poultry. There is some high labor in in your daily efforts of caring for these animals. But like in the meat birds, it's a short term, right? Because you raise them up and you process them and you're done. In the egg layers, though, there's lower labor. You might have to collect those eggs every day, but you have that year round if you're able to keep them laying year round. A lot of times the birds will stop laying for part of the year. Pasture birds must be moved to fresh grass frequently. It's really important that you keep that rotation happening, and you probably need some grains to supplement that pasture. And selling meat birds, the processing, you may need to do it on your own. There is down here in the Treasure Valley in Idaho, southern Idaho, there is a processor that will process your birds for you. It comes at a cost, and so you just have to work that into your budget, which Kate will be talking about later today. And I like this last con that everybody loves poultry: the bears, the raccoons, the skunks, the weasels, the coyotes, dogs, hawks, owls. So it's really important that you have good protection. Okay, moving up in the scale a little bit from size, we're going to move into goats and sheep. So goats are a very diverse animal enterprise, which we'll also learn about today. You can raise goats for meat, milk, fiber, breeding stock, and pets. And they're just adorable. I think that should be on the pros list. And multiple births are common with goats, and so it's easy to grow your herd really, really fast. And fast turnaround time, so 5 months gestation. So you don't have to wait very long for those babies to get there, and then each doe might have 2 or 3 or even possibly 4 kids. And if you're raising them for meat, those kids can reach the market weight in not very long, 6 to 8 months. And all that they need is their mother's care and some good grass to grow on. It's not necessary to feed out a goat on grain. So the turnaround time in that investment could be lower. Right, so if you're growing, you can grow goats. There is a growing market for local goat milk and cheese, and that's one of those niche markets that takes a little bit of effort in learning how to do and making sure you have the science right and making sure you're following the local regulations. But it is a possibility, and it's a growing market for sure. Lots of byproducts from local goat milk. And of course, the fiber can be sold commercially or direct marketed to hand spinners. It's a really great option if you're the type of person that doesn't want to have to harvest your animals for meat. Fiber goats, as long as you're able to learn the ins and outs of how to care for that fiber so that you have a quality product, you get to keep the animal and basically harvest the product, the fiber, and have that as an enterprise. Of course, I mentioned earlier we had baby goats one time, and they were Houdinis. So if you're not familiar with goats, that is one of the things that you really need to brush up on, is making sure that you have excellent fencing, because they seem to think they can get out wherever they want to, and they do. And some options with that are to have taller woven wire panels, and also to reinforce that with electric fencing so that they respect those woven wire panels. And of course, if you're doing a milk enterprise with your goats, you need to be very conscious of practices with cleanliness and biosecurity so that you're meeting the legal requirements to sell that product safely to consumers. And it's really important to, like I mentioned earlier, to have an understanding of the fiber and what's required there so that you can, and that takes a little bit of learning. So if that's not something you're interested in, that could be a con for you in taking on goats as a fiber enterprise. And just like any animal, they're also vulnerable to predators, and you might need either some kind of herd animal or some other kind of ways to protect them. All right, sheep and goats are similar in a lot of ways. They can also be raised for meat, fiber, and breeding stock. They have multiple births like goats, and also a 5-month gestation. And similar to goats, lambs can reach market weight of 6 to 8 months just on the mother's care and good pasture. When it comes to marketing of that meat product, lamb meat is probably a little more popular than goat, so it might be easier to direct market. And the lambs are going to produce a little bit more fiber than the goats will, and so that there is a market for that, for the wool that the sheep are producing. far as the cons, we have also a need for good fencing. They're not quite as hard on fences as sheep are, or as goats are, excuse me. But having that woven wire field fence and paired with the electric fence is pretty important. And again, if you're going to dive into the wool market, it's really important that you have that knowledge. And of course, you know, you see those, the Pyrenees dogs there, the guard dogs. It's really important to protect your assets, protect that enterprise from, because they are vulnerable to predators. All right, now pigs. Raising pigs for meat and breeding stock. So pigs are probably the most prolific of anybody. You know, they can have litters up to 2 times a year if you're managing your breeding stock in that way. And each litter that they can have 8 to 14 piglets, which is quite a few pigs. And they have a really fast turnaround time of gestation of only 4 months, so that they can, and then those baby pigs can reach their market weight in 6 to 8 months. You would want to grow those pigs up to be about 260 to 300 pounds in that time frame. And some breeds are different, like it might take longer. You hear about heritage breed pigs. They might take a little longer to finish out, or they might be a different frame size. But typically you can reach market weight with a hog in 6 to 8 months. Pigs are a little different in the way that they want their diet. They're you know, they're pigs. You talk about, you can supplement their diet with all kinds of things. Extra milk or whey, say if you have a enterprise that has, you know, you have milk goats, but you're not finding a market for all of your goat milk, so you could feed some of that extra milk to your pigs, trying to connect all of your enterprises to not waste anything, so they could take some of that farm waste and utilize it in their diet. And pork is a fairly easy meat to direct market, and a lot of times pigs are raised in small outdoor pens. So if you have a consideration of how much size you have, pigs might be an option if you have not a lot of room. And if you manage pigs appropriately, they like to be clean, but I mean, one of the things that people talk about is pigs are really stinky. Well, pigs actually like to be clean and can be not as stinky if managed appropriately. One of the things that is a consideration about pigs is making sure that your shelter is appropriate, because pigs, they don't have a great way to regulate their body temperature, so they can get chilled or overheated really easily. So it's really important to make sure that you take care of them in their shelter, in their bedding. And it's more likely that you'll have to purchase some feeds to finish out your pigs for optimal growth. They don't necessarily will perform the best on all of those farm scraps, even though it will supplement their feed, but it's likely that you might have to purchase some feed to finish them out. And if you're going to keep them year round, so some people might just buy piglets and then raise them up just for, you know, seasonal, only have them on their property seasonally. But if you're going to have a sow or a boar and have that breeding operation year round, you'll really need to invest in some sturdy facilities and equipment to be able to handle them appropriately. And then of course, one of the things I think we all might know about pigs is they're very, very vigorous rooters and diggers. So if you have them out on pasture, they could destroy it. And that might be a good thing if you're trying to regenerate a pasture, because they'll also be fertilizing it and uprooting all the things that might be growing that you didn't want out there. But if you do keep them on pasture, you need to think about rotating them often so that they don't damage the plants and the soils in that pasture. All right, our largest animal enterprise we have here are cattle, and cows are my favorite. We had a baby cow just yesterday, and I get so excited. Just love baby cows. And so cattle can be used for beef, dairy, or breeding stock. And the beef breeds, you think about, you hear the words grass-fed, grass-finished. It is possible to reach market weight on good pasture. Good pasture is the operative word there. And And even in the dairy breeds, it is also possible with, if you have some good genetics and also high quality pasture, that the dairy cattle can produce excellent milk with little or no grain. So if that's something that's important to you as part of your goals to be able to do, then it is a possibility. And they have the ability to be, like I said, grass-fed and or grass-finished for beef, milk, and cheese. When it comes to housing and fencing, barbed wire fence works, but they can also be trained to respect a hot wire fence. And it's pretty incredible that you can manage 1,000+ pound animals with electricity, but it is possible. And they're pretty hardy and self-sufficient. I just love to watch my cows stand out there in the pasture and munch away. It's pretty, I don't know, grounding, I guess, for me. And the cons to cattle, so they are the largest livestock that we're talking about today. And as such, they have a longer gestation time. It takes 11 months for them to produce a calf. And most often, the cows only have one calf at a time. And then it takes another 2.5 to 3 years before that, that calf is ready to be harvested for a meat product. So it's a longer investment of time and finances. And it's also really important to have good facilities and handling equipment if you ever have to doctor or handle your animals, because they're big and they can be hard on equipment, so it needs to be sturdy. And in a dairy operation, it's really important that you're also, just like the dairy goats, maintaining good cleanliness so that you can meet those legal requirements. And of course, because they're bigger animals, they're going to eat more, and so they're going to require more land if you're just pasturing, or even more hay if you're feeding hay instead of grazing. Just to kind of wrap up here, when you're evaluating your potential livestock enterprises, you want to think about what do you have available as far as time and labor. You know, thinking about if you have just as much time to just collect eggs every day, or as much time to be milking a goat every day. Think about your time and labor resources, and thinking about how it might complement your other enterprises' labor resources. Like I said, if you have your milk goats and you have extra milk, then you can feed them to your pigs, and the garden scraps can feed your pigs. That all works together. Other things to consider is that you want to first think about your market. So what's the end goal, end product that this livestock enterprise will be creating for you? And is there a way for you to sell it in your area in a way that can be profitable? And that last part, you want it to be an animal that you like to be around. I have a hard time finding an animal I don't like to be around, but maybe there is one out there I haven't met yet. But I hope that that you can bring these livestock into your family and make them part of your life, because I know that they can bring a lot of enjoyment and also be a profitable enterprise for your small acreage. And that concludes my presentation. Questions for Melissa? I'm not Melissa.
Rebecca, thanks for that great overview of the pros and cons of different livestock species. We do have one question. How much space is needed for chicken rotation on pasture?
That is a great question, and I
Can I have
some. Yes, please.
I'm going to talk about that in my presentation. So if we could
That was what I was hoping, that somebody